All right, it is time to get started. So welcome. In collaboration with Colorado River Days, we are very pleased to welcome our very special guest, Tom Martin. Tom has been getting blisters on his feet and hopelessly lost while hiking in the Grand Canyon from river rafting trips for over 50 years. He has authored Day Hikes from the River, Big Water Little Boats, and Guide to the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. He edited Otis Dock Martens' book on the first 100 river runners in Grand Canyon titled From Pal to Power. All right, Tom, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we will have you take it away.
Thanks, Shannon. And welcome everybody this afternoon. Thank you so much for showing up. I'm going to try to do a little magic here with the computer and we'll see if it works. I need to make sure I hit this little button down here and then hit that button there. Click this over here and we'll see if this works. If you haven't been to the Reardon Mansion, you really need to go check it out. The architecture there is stunning. The history, the Northern Arizona history that this building represents is really amazing. It's an honor to be able to present at these brown bag events and get to work with Shannon Benjamin and Nikki Lobar, Kathy Ferretta, just great folks that really make this a successful Arizona State Park. If you've showed up here today to see Otis Dock Marston in the Nevills years, 1942 to 1949, you're at the right place at the right time. It's going to take me about 40 minutes to cover 10 years of river running. And so I'm not going to do a very good job, but I'm going to do the best I can with the time we've got. I think this is the last event in the Colorado River Days Flagstaff Festival that happens this time every year from September 2 to September 12th. And I just want to give a shout out to Allison Gitlin, who pours her heart into that event. And my talk today is part of that as well. As Shannon kindly mentioned, I write river guides for river runners. I wrote a book called Big Water Little Boats about the first dory to come to Grand Canyon in the 1950s. I wrote a hiking book for river runners so they can get lost with me in the Grand Canyon. And I had the chance to do some editing along with Bill Bishop and Hazel Clark and Christian Wright and a bunch of other great people on a manuscript written by a fellow named Otis Reed Marston. Manuscript was at the Huntington Library. And it was during that project that I got to know Doc a little bit and thought, wow, what is it about this guy? I know nothing about him. He's in a key part of the days of running Grand Canyon, and what's that about? So it's an honor to be able to introduce to you today, after 10 years of work, Dock Marston, the Colorado River Historian, Volume 1, 1894 to 1960. This is going to be our next book, and it should be out in ebook in the next couple weeks. I'll be giving some readings today out of that work, and it is this last decade of studying Dock Marston and getting a chance to get to know the amazing Marston family that I can bring you this presentation today. I'm going to do a quick obligatory nod of the hat to these archives and museums and historical societies that help make this project and this presentation today work. Here's a fun little factoid. These two guys here, they were the top two Colorado river runners by mileage in the 1940s. And they mostly boated together, though that didn't always happen, and you'll find out why. That's Norm Nevills on the right with the crazy hair, and that's Otis Reed Dock Marston on the left. Who knew? I didn't. So we'll start looking at the Colorado River Basin here. The basin is 1,450 miles long. It covers a surface area larger than France. It covers almost 8% of the contiguous United States, and yet it ranks 26th in flow of all rivers in North America, and it is one of the driest river basins in the world. Unfortunately, we're rapidly closing in on 50 million people relying on that river. Again, one of the driest river basins in the world. Well, that's what it is. I'm going to be talking about some of the river canyons and areas of the Colorado River Basin. I'm probably going to mention Flaming Gorge, way up in southern Wyoming. I'm going to mention Lador Canyon and Split Mountain and Whirlpool and the confluence with the Yampa River here in northern Utah and northern Colorado and Dinosaur National Monument. I'll mention the San Juan River in southern Utah and Glen Canyon here in southern Utah and into northern Arizona. And then downstream of that is the Grand Canyon. So that kind of puts you a little bit of reference to the place here. To the west of the Colorado River Basin is Death Valley and the Nevada Basin and Range. And further west than that is the Pacific Ocean, the other side of California. You know, in 1920, there might have been a 12-year-old kid walking down the street named Norm, and he might have walked past an older gentleman that went by the name of Mart, because both Nevills and Marston grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. Otis Reed Marston was born February 11th, 1894. Here's a picture of this cute little 7-year-old in the 2nd grade. Went too far, too fast. Otis loved to swim. He didn't like basketball. He didn't like football. He loved to swim. He was the 880-yard champ in high school, swam across the Golden Gate a couple times. Got his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, 1916 in Berkeley. Cornell, 1917, his second bachelor's degree in industrial engineering, and he joined the Navy. Now, Otis, we all think, mild-mannered as a lamb, but when he was a sailor, the boy was tough. Hot damn. Marston really just, as far as I can figure, excelled in the Navy. He really enjoyed it. He picked up boxing. He got to ride on boats, and he got into submarine command school, which was pretty crazy at the time. Well, he was shipped to San Diego, to the submarine base there from the East Coast. And he and a couple Navy friends of his stopped at a little town called Williams, and they got on a spur train to the south rim of Grand Canyon in December of 1918 and got on the mules, went down to Hermit Rest, took the mules all the way down to the river. And Otis went down and looked at the rapid there and turned to a friend of his and said, "You know what? I can swim that." And he would swim that some decades later. He ended up for a short time as a submarine commander in the H-7 submarine, and then he left the Navy. He ended up meeting this wonderful woman, Margaret Garthwaite, Mag, as I call her in the book. She had some different names. The family had a lot of different names for the same people, and so I try to kind of stick to one name. Mag was an incredible woman. She was friendly, she was thoughtful, she was kind, she liked river running. And she and Otis, you know, they were a couple until she died of lung cancer in the late 1960s. Just an incredible woman. They had 3 children, twin girls, Lowell and Maridel, and a son named Garth. And Garth's wife, Shirley, is with us today, as is their son, Jeff. Norm Davies Nevills was born April 9th, 1908, and he grew up in Oakland, California. Again, Oakland and Berkeley, they're right there, right next to each other. Norm's dad got into oil prospecting, and I think he was a pretty sharp guy. He knew there was oil out there. He just didn't find it. And I think when the Anna field came in, he was dead already, but I think he was looking for the Anna field. I could be totally wrong. But Norm's dad was out there at a place called Mexican Hat, and Norm's mother and Norm came out to Mexican Hat in 1928. Norm is 20 years old. He hasn't finished college. He's kind of struggling a little bit there. And there is nothing out at Mexican Hat for a 20-year-old guy to do. I mean, wow, it is in the middle of nowhere. Well, there was a bridge there and there was a river there. But Norm didn't get dialed into the river for another 5 years. In 1933, he worked for the Rainbow Bridge Monument Valley expedition, and they had these cool boats. And Norm's boats that he's going to build his Satiron boats in 1938 have a kind of a little likeness to these boats that were used on the Rainbow Bridge Monument Valley expedition in 33. A really cool thing happened to Norm in 33. He met Doris Margaret John, and they were married in October. And they honeymooned a little bit down on the river, but still Norm didn't quite put it together that he could make some money there on the river. He was working for the USGS, running the stage gauge there. It wasn't until 1936 that he did his first commercial river run on the San Juan. The very next year, this woman showed up, Dr. Elzada Clover, a botanist at the University of Michigan. Dr. Clover, as a botanist, realized that there was no listing of plants along the Colorado River through Cataract Canyon, Glen Canyon, and Grand Canyon. So she put together an expedition to fill in that gap. Otis Marston would later find that Dr. Clover was horrified when she showed up at Mexican Hat in 1938 to find that Norm had painted Neville's expedition on the sides of the boats instead of the Clover botanical expedition. But Otis Dock Marston would figure out that without this woman, Dr. Elzada Clover, this river trip would have never made it through the canyons of the Colorado to Lake Mead. It just wouldn't have happened. The trip was a success because of her. But Nevills, I think of Norm, he was trying to do the best he can. He lived out in the middle of nowhere. He needed to promote everything he could. And I don't blame him for that at all. In 1940, Norm tried again to run the river, and he did successfully with a group of people from Green River, Wyoming, all the way to Lake Mead. Barry Goldwater was on that trip. Millie Baker was on that trip. And a guy named Charlie Larrabee was on that trip. And everybody had a good time, as far as Doc could eventually figure out, except for Norm and Doris, who ended up being isolated from everybody else. On that trip, Norm started burning driftwood fire piles. And you can see in the upper right at Boulder Narrows that the top of that rock is on fire, that white spot there. This trip would come back to haunt Norm, and I'll talk about that later. The more river trips Norm did in the Grand Canyon, the better he got at it. There's no denying that. Doc was really good about teasing that out. This is 1941, when kayaker Alexander Grant headed down the river with Norm and a couple other people, a small group of people, had a good time. And then how did Doc get to the river? Well, it happened on a San Juan trip in March of 42. The guy on the right in the red circle is Neil Wilson, and Neil and Doc knew each other. Actually, Neil and Doc skied, they were early skiers, with their kids, with Garth, with Doc's son Garth, and Bruce, that's Neil's son. Norm was complaining to Neil Wilson about the fact that nobody wanted to book the Grand Canyon trip because they thought it was so dangerous. And Neil Wilson, the advertising guy, said, you know what? If you give me a 50% discount for the Grand Canyon run, I'll bring kids and we'll show the world that the river is safe. And Norm said, deal. So sure enough, in 1942, there's a 12-year-old on this river trip through Grand Canyon that has his 13th birthday at Phantom Ranch. And there's a 16-year-old, Garth Marston. And oh yeah, I forgot to mention, that's Big Ed Hudson. And Doc's gonna have a river trip with Ed later on, but this boat has flipped. It's there's Norm, he's pulling it to shore. There's Wayne McConkey walking out of the water. Wayne was driving the boat when it flipped. And, you know, this is the typical get the water out of the boat, have a yard sale, dry everything out. But the press happened to see this boat flip from Desert View. And one of the people on the trip, besides Norm here, shaking Garth's hand for bringing back the hat that floated away, one of the guys on the trip was Preston Walker, who worked for the Grand Junction Sentinel. And when the press called him at Phantom Ranch, Press denied anything had happened. They had not flipped a boat. This was all about show. We didn't want anybody to worry back home. Well, gosh, they had a phone. Everybody called back home and said, yeah, we're fine. We're having a great trip. And they were, but it was just the time. At the end of this trip, the kids were ecstatic. It was just a great trip. And so were the dads. They had had a great time. I'm going to read a little bit now about that 1942 river trip. In a hint of things to come, Doc wrote, "It may be well to study a little of the boating technique rather carefully. Doc knew the frontiers of the West Coast had become sophisticated, so he needed to start east again to find the real frontiers off the main highways. And he found the frontier, quote, in this country that is some wild brown water smashing through a lot of rocks, a lot of sand, more rocks, more sand, and wind enough to blow it away." Mart realized that the outstanding thing about this life is its magnificent simplicity, consisting only of the essentials: food, sleep, transportation. You don't have appointments to keep. Nobody cares how you look. You have no designated hours. Your whole system gets toughened and your soul refreshed. Doc Marston went back to Berkeley, California with his film that he took of this river trip and immediately started giving presentations to church groups and all kinds of other, American Institute of Banking here, about river running with Norm Nevills on the San Juan River. And Doc would continue to do this for the next 5 years, doing dozens of presentations around the Western United States. And these presentations immediately showed results. In 1943, some people showed up at Mexican Hat saying, you know, I saw this film by this guy in California, and we've come out to do the river. It was really cool. Doc wanted to keep boating. And this was at the height of World War II in 1944. But he knew that, well, Norm's in Mexican Hat and we can get to Lee's Ferry. Norm can get back to Mexican Hat. We can work out our travel arrangements. Let's run the San Juan River. And they did. There's an incredible 30-minute film about this river trip. I've cut this down to 6 minutes just to show you a little bit of what Mexican Hat looked like in 1942 and then what Glen Canyon looked like back in, 1944. That's the Marston car there, and they're driving one of the San Juan punts, these boats that Norm had built. That's the San Juan hotel there in the back there. What's left? That guy in the white shirt is Preston Walker, and Walker ran with Norm for a couple of years. He's the reporter from the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel. Behind Norm, the little girl back there, that's Joan Nevills, and she's coming on this river trip. This is the Marston twins, and there's Joni hopping in, and the Marston twins have brought along a friend of theirs from school. Now, Doc went through Grand Canyon in 42 with his son. Now he wants to boat with his daughters. And off they go. Doc got this picture of this boat going by from the bridge, the San Juan Bridge. Lots of sand waves at that time. You can see it almost looks like ocean waves, these static waves there, and the boat's just rocking, bobbing up over them. This is at the Mendenhall Loop. Doc's climbed up on this hillside and must have given a shout out to the boats so he could film them as they went by. And he's going to go over a small little pass and connect up with them. these sand waves that make these great bobbing up and down. Life jackets, nobody needed life jackets there. Well, they didn't have them. They needed them, they didn't have them. Navajo Mountain in the distance out there. This is the mouth of Grand Gulch. Here comes Norm. This is a staged film work here. So Doc knew what was going on. He knew the film he wanted. This is Paiute Farms, an area where the river really gets wide and shallow. That's Press Walker over there cursing because he's in the wrong channel. And then, of course, they get into Glen Canyon. This area today is under the waters, impounded behind Glen Canyon Dam. But I wanted to include some of the film footage of running Glen Canyon, just so that you could get a little sense of what that must have been like before the dam. I messed up because you've seen this clip already. Wonder why it's repeating that. Oh well. The Marston twins were excellent swimmers, as was Lukey, their friend, but Joni Nevills was not. So there's only one thing to do: teach her how to swim. She's all for it. That's it. Kick. Get your arms going. They just had a great time on that trip. More amazing pictures of Glen Canyon. The river was running about 50,000 cubic feet a second. When they got to Glen Canyon, they got out of the San Juan, got the San Juan confluence with the Colorado River in Glen Canyon, and headed on downstream. This beautiful country. They pulled in at Forbidden Canyon to hike up to Rainbow Bridge. And it's a 6-mile hike. Off they went. Just a stunning natural feature. And off to the side, there was a way to scramble up and get to the top of the bridge. That's exactly what they did. And there's Doc on the right with his mason jar as a water bottle before Nalgene. Top of Rainbow Bridge. Way up there, be careful. And then downriver past Cane Creek, down to Lee's Ferry, where it was time to go home. Of course, Norm had a pretty easy time of it because he's just going to drive back. Well, easy time. He's going to take these terrible dirt roads all the way back to Mexican Hat. While the California contingent is going to have a little different traveling arrangements. Marble Canyon Lodge. There they go. And everybody else gets in this really packed bus. How did they manage? Well, they did. Back to Flagstaff, back to the train, back to San Francisco and Berkeley. So on this trip in 44, Doc has brought his twin daughters and a friend of theirs During that 1944 cruise, Doc talked with Neil Wilson, Press Walker, and Norm about running the Snake and Salmon rivers. Doc had met some folks in San Francisco, and they had really talked up the Snake and the Salmon. And Doc was like, well, let's go up there and run the thing. But the war effort, rationing of gasoline and tires, postponed that trip. So they had to just wait till they could get up there. As a consolation trip, Doc rowed his first boat for Norm through Cataract Canyon and Glen Canyon to Lee's Ferry in 1945. The guy standing in the back on the right is Big Ed Hudson that Doc met in 1942. And what I find fascinating about this now is Doc is back again with his twin daughters and his wife and a San Francisco debutante way off on the left there. Wait a minute, why is there a San Francisco debutante here? It's because her father couldn't make the trip and had already paid a large amount of money to make the trip and couldn't do it. So he told his daughter, why don't you go on that river trip? It'd be like going to summer camp. Well, Cataract Canyon is not summer camp, but she thrived on that trip. She's still alive, a wonderful woman. We had a great conversation. Just really helped me kind of piece things together here. It's really, really cool. But, you know, these circles are starting to grow. Doc is bringing in more people to keep Norm going on the river. They do make it up to Hell's Canyon on the Snake. This is a group portrait there. Look, there's more circles. Doc has brought these people to this river trip. 1946, they also ran the Salmon, more circles. This is a really cool relationship that's going on here between Norm Nevills, who has the boats, and Doc, who has the connections to bring the people. And Doc loves boating. It's going so well for Norm that he buys a Piper Cub J3 in the end of 1946. This is a wonderful tool for somebody who lives in Mexican Hat, the middle of nowhere, Utah, and suddenly he's got a way to get fresh vegetables to like fly to a grocery store and still keep the place going there at Mexican Hat. It was a wonderful tool. In 1947, Dock Marston runs Lador with Norm. Garth Marston is there with his wife, Shirley. On the far right, there's Garth, and sitting just to Garth's left is Shirley, and she's with us today. Doc's wife, Mag, is not on this river trip in 47 because she's babysitting little Jeff, who is with us today. Also on that trip is Doc's daughters and a friend of theirs from the San Francisco Bay Area named Willie Taylor. They had a great trip. So by the end of 47, Doc and Norm have run the Grand Canyon together in 42. They've run the San Juan together in 44. They ran Cataract and Glen Canyon together in 45. They ran Hell's Canyon and the Salmon River up in Idaho in 1946. And Flaming Gorge Lador again through Grand Canyon with Garth and Doc both rowing boats for Norm in 1947. So here's the 1947 Grand Canyon River trip, the 20th river trip to go through Grand Canyon. And I'm going to read a little bit here. Doc's letters during the spring of 1947 to Norm were loaded with questions. Have you any history on the Pathé trip? Aren't you the only one with a 3-trip record? Why did Pathé pull out of the river at Hermit Creek? Doc sounded like a 5-year-old asking endless why questions, when to most people, accurate answers seemed too trivial to bother with. Doc soon discovered errors he had made based on incorrect material in newspaper articles. By the end of 1947, he realized much of the written material about the river he'd found in many of the facts that had been stated to him by the river experts were in fact as muddy as the Colorado itself. What was accurate and what was not continued to evade him. Another of Doc's dilemmas in 1947 involved his main source of historical material, Norm Nevills. It took Doc most of 1947 to realize Norm wasn't actually one of his, well, Norm was actually one of his poorest sources, because Norm answered questions with information, whether it was true or not, just as long as it was an answer. Doc later understood there was nothing wrong with that policy, but it is hard on historians. It's designed for dudes. Well, in 1947, Doc's river education took another leap forward after corresponding with more passengers and crew members from Neville's trips. These exchanges revealed to Doc that other people also saw problems with the validity of Norm's history. No problem there. But those letters revealed what soon loomed as another ugly truth. An ever-growing number of the people he contacted wanted nothing to do with Norm Nevills. Well, what was that about? One of the things that kind of rankled some people on the 1947 Grand Canyon River trip was Al and Elma Malott. They were filming for Walt Disney. And Norm found some dynamite down at the Palisades and he set it off. And the Malotts came running and they were like, what's happened? And Norm said, oh, I found some dynamite, I set it off, isn't this great? And then he found some more dynamite. And the Malotts and others on the trip, they put their foot down and said, hey, you put that stuff back where you got it. And Norm did, but he said, well, I'll come back next year and it'll be there waiting for me. That summer of 47, Doc decided to write a small pamphlet on river running history, and he and Mag made a road trip to visit river folks. They went to the South Rim, they visited with Emery Kolb. They went to Salt Lake City, where they visited with Harry Ailson. And Harry and Doc, he didn't hit it off at first. They were kind of a little antagonistic to each other, but eventually they became incredibly close and very tight friends. The guy in the lower left talking to Emery Kolb is David Rust. And David and Doc were great friends till David passed away. On the lower right, that's Bert Loper in the middle, those three guys sitting there. And Doc met Bert that summer of 47. And Doc got into letter writing like I have never seen anyone. It's like somebody who spews out emails every day, like maybe me, I don't know. He wrote Lois Jotter, he wrote Barry Goldwater, he wrote Elzada Clover, he wrote Bus Hatch, he wrote John Doerr, he wrote Francis Farquhar, Randall Henderson, he wrote Frank Dodge and Johnny Maxon and David Rust, and all these people getting information about river history. Now, remember that 1940 river trip with Charlie Larrabee and Mildred Baker and Barry Goldwater? Well, Charlie Larrabee and Norm Nevills did not get along, and Charlie and Harry Ailson started a river tour company to compete with Norm in 1947, and they discounted his river trips by 50%. But Norm still had Doc, and Doc was still bringing in people for his river trips, and things were going okay for Norm. But people were looking and they were wondering. And in 1948, that's the last year that Doc and Norm boated together. In the lower right, there's Doc rowing a boat. Garth was on that trip as well as a boatman, and Besto Robinson sitting on the front deck there. But Doc started boating with other people in 48. In the upper left, Big Ed Hudson built a motorboat to attempt an uprun of Grand Canyon. And there's Doc sitting on it. That's the Esmeralda II there. They upran all the way to 217-mile rapid, quite a ways up into Grand Canyon, but they still had 217 miles to go to get to Lee's Ferry. And that's as far uprunning as that boat ever made it. And then on the upper right, that's Preston Walker, who Doc had met on a Norm Nevills trip in 1942. Preston's there with his wife, Becky, and Doc's there with Mag, and they're going to make the first recorded descent of the Dolores River. Now, one of the things that might have been the straw to break Doc's back with Norm Nevills was something that happened on the 1948 river trip between Norm and this young college woman. She was going to college, who came in at Phantom Ranch on the 48 trip. And Norm spent a good amount of time with her and no one else. And the rest of the trip knew they were around somewhere, but didn't know where they were. And Norm apologized to his wife later, and she ran with him in 49 to make sure this wouldn't happen again. But it was just another one of these little things that just irked Doc. Oh, I'm going to go back for a minute. Sorry. Yeah. I want to read a little bit about 1948. Dock Marston had gotten his start on the river through Norm. In turn, Norm has stayed afloat financially during the war years due to Doc. The list-making engineer had done well to forge such a strong and long-lasting friendship with such a temperamental man, unable to take criticism. In Doc's studying river history and actually boating with Norm, Doc now knew Norm never got along with anyone for long. Doc wrote Ed Hudson that he wanted to leave Norm before the friction gets too hot. Over the years, Doc repeatedly had smoothed out a lot of trouble for Norm and didn't mind doing it. But Doc knew a real blow-up might await them someday. It didn't help that Norm claimed only his specially built boats and the Nevills technique could provide safe passage through Grand Canyon. Doc's research proved that claim to be incorrect. In short, the two men no longer needed each other and were getting on each other's nerves. 1949, Norm ran his last river trip through Grand Canyon. Doc and Garth were not there. Doc kept boating. He ran through Grand Canyon in the lower left photograph with Ed Hudson in the Esmeralda II, the first motorboat through Grand Canyon. And Doc went back to the Salmon River to float the salmon on a weird boat called a sweep scow, because Doc had learned that a sweep scow had gone through most of Grand Canyon in the 1920s, and he wanted to know what that boat was like and how it handled the rapids. So he went back and did that. Back to the book for 1949. Norm saw major changes happening in the river world that threatened his operations. Don Harris carried passengers for pay in Grand Canyon. Larrabee, Elson, and others were doing the same in Glen Canyon. Their prices were half what Norm charged. Glen Canyon was full of rubber rafts, many with motors. Doc and Hudson had motored through the Grand Canyon in 49 and had received banner press for their trip. Norm received little for his. He told each of his passengers in 1949 not to share their journals with Doc. And Norm knew one of the 1949 passengers on his river trip through Grand Canyon admired Doc. Norm told his new boatman, Pat Riley, quote, with a crooked smile, that he was going to fix that. Those who knew Norm well saw him become jumpy and apparently unstable during 1949. At Lava Falls that year, John Riffey found Norm so nervous that Riffey admitted he hardly knew Norm as the same man that he visited at Lava Falls in 1947. Others on the trip who traveled with Norm during earlier years now found him preoccupied and moody, lacking vitality and exuberance he had displayed on earlier river trips. And then there was the flying. By 1949, eyebrows rose at Norm's aggressive flying. Press Walker wrote Doc that he and his wife Becky helped load Norm, Doris, and Joan up in their plane one day and then held his breath while Norm bluffed out one of the big airplanes and took off with a load that Walker maintained was twice what the plane was supposed to carry. Press Walker prophetically wrote that if Norm, quote, keeps flying and souping it up, I think he's going to be wrapped up permanently in it. And that's what happened on September 19th, 1949. The day before, the Sunday of September 18th, 1949, Norm, Doris, and their younger daughter, Sandra, had flown up to Wasatch, Utah to have Sunday lunch with their daughter, Joan, who was going to the Wasatch Academy. And on the flight back over the Utah desert to Mexican Hat, the motor of their little plane was running rough. The next day, September 19th, Norm and Doris got into that plane. They took off, and as soon as they were airborne, the motor quit. Well, Norm spun the plane around dead stick without any power and came right back to the runway, but he was too low, and they flew into this head wall. plane burst into flames and they died. I'm going to end this talk today on Dock and the Nevills years with this odd picture of a teeter-totter. And you're like, why am I doing this? Because through the 1950s, if Dock ran into someone who was talking Norm Nevills down, Dock would jump on the teeter-totter and get down to the ground and tell them when they were up in the air how good Norm was and the cool things that Norm did, and vice versa. If somebody was down on the teeter-totter talking Norm up, Dock would get on the teeter-totter and raise them in the air and talk Norm down to earth. Here's a 1951 letter that Dock wrote Jim Rigg. He wrote that Norm had built up some righteous indignation against me. I knew he would. I am anxious to give Norm credit for his accomplishments on the river, just as I am anxious to give the same treatment to every other man on the river. I have found that none of the rivermen are supermen and that they are human beings. There is a tendency to forget that. So that's why there's a teeter-totter here. If somebody talked Norm up, Dock would bring them down to earth. If somebody talked Norm down, Dock would talk Norm up. He saw Norm as an ordinary man with ordinary failings. That's the relationship they had. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm going to end my screen share and we will take some questions and answers. You're on mute, Shannon. There you go.
Does anyone have any questions for Tom today?
Jeff, you're on mute too, and I hear you talking to Shirley. There you go.
Oh, no, Tom, I wasn't talking about Mother's a 19th century electronic communications person. So I was talking to her about another Zoom meeting that I've been on periodically.
I don't blame her. It's this communication stuff with electronics is terrifying. Questions, comments, suggestions?
Tom, this was
we can go home.
Tom, what a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. And you said that your new ebook is going to be available soon?
Couple weeks, fingers crossed.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you so much, Tom. It's always such a great pleasure to have you here for a special guest. And
you're very welcome. Hey, there's a question.
Yes.
I see coming in chat. Thank heavens for a question. Mark's asking, is the Willie Taylor mentioned that I mentioned in the talk Wilson Beagle Taylor? Yes, it is. Doc met Willie. Willie worked in a saddlery shop for his dad. He was a leather worker, and they were in the same high school together, though Willie was younger, and that's where they met. Willie had some family troubles and ran away to the river with Doc in 47. Doc said, come on, why don't you come boating with us? And Willie did, and he got into it. And he died on the river of a heart attack in 1956, I think, if I get that right. So just, yeah. And of course, I talk about him quite a bit in the book, Doc's relationship with Willie. And Mag as well. They lived about a block and a half away there in Berkeley, and they were just great friends.
So Tom?
Jeff.
Tom, my mom was commenting that that the river and river running and the river guys was Doc's passion from the first day that she had met him and met my dad right after the Second World War. So this was no half and half affair. This is what he did.
Absolutely. Yeah, it became all consuming with him. I mean, the title of the book is The Colorado River Historian. And Doc had to deal with dams, the dams that were built. He had to deal with river management that the Park Service put in place while he tried to capture the history of what really happened with those river runners out there, because there were so many different and incorrect stories about what was going on the river. Newspaper articles were incorrect. He figured that out. You're exactly right. Thank you, for pointing that out. The river was his life, and I found it so heartwarming that his wife Mag, she enjoyed river running too. I see Melissa Sivney is here. Melissa, I'm curious to know your thoughts on this presentation. You may need to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. How are you today?
I'm good. Sorry, I was eating my lunch. Hi, yeah, thanks. This was wonderful. I appreciate you giving Elzada Clover her due on kind of the very start of the whole Norm Nevills river running era. She was a really fascinating person. So yeah, it was all very interesting all the way through. Thanks so much, Tom.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you. And I see Richard Cororoli is here. Richard, you're a studier of Otis Marston from way back. I'm just curious to know if you learned anything new today, or whether this was all par for the course for you. And you'll need to unmute yourself if you care to.
Let's see, I saw a lot of photos that I hadn't seen before, so that was interesting.
Oh, good. Well, if there are no more questions, then I want to thank Shannon for letting me give this presentation today. And thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you for
Thanks,
joining us,
Tom.
everyone.